For 3,300 years, a golden face has become almost inseparable from the image of ancient Egypt. The blue and gold stripes of the nemes headdress, the eyes outlined in black, and the serene smile are known across the world. At a single glance, most of us recognize the figure before us. It is Tutankhamun, the young king brought back into the light after more than 3 millennia in darkness. Yet behind that familiar face lies a troubling question. Was it truly created for Tutankhamun, or did the most famous object discovered in his tomb once bear the identity of someone else? This question did not arise simply because the mask appears unusual under modern lighting. It begins with the very purpose the object was meant to serve. To us, it is a masterpiece of gold. To those who created it, the mask held a sacred function, one directly connected to the fate of the dead. In November 1922, Howard Carter discovered the entrance to Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Beyond its sealed doors lay chambers crowded with objects intended for eternity. Carter and his team spent years recording and removing the artifacts. Deep within the burial complex, beyond layers of shrines and nested coffins, they finally reached the resting place of the king himself. Covering the mummy's face was a mask made from 22 pounds of solid gold. The gold was set with deep blue lapis lazuli, turquoise, obsidian, colored glass, and quartz. Yet its value lay in far more than precious metal or exquisite craftsmanship. In ancient Egyptian belief, gold was the imperishable flesh of the gods. To cover the king in gold was not merely to adorn the dead. It was a step in transforming him into an eternal being. The hieroglyphic inscriptions across the back and shoulders of the mask served the same purpose. They identified the features of the face and called upon the king's eyes, nose, and ears to continue functioning in the world beyond. The mask did more than protect the head of the body. It provided a complete face, allowing the soul to recognize the place to which it must return. This changes the question of identity entirely. If the mask were merely decorative, the identity of its original owner might be little more than a story of workshop practices or artistic style. But if it was meant to guide a particular soul back to a particular body, the face upon it could not belong to just anyone. A generic mask would fail in its sacred duty. A mask made for someone else could create the very confusion the ritual was designed to prevent. In religious terms, therefore, Tutankhamun's mask had to belong to Tutankhamun. It had to be prepared for him, carry his identity, and guide his soul back to the correct body lying beneath it. That is the most reasonable place to begin. For this reason, any evidence that the mask once belonged to another person is no minor discrepancy. It strikes at the very reason the mask existed. The mask was found in the proper place, resting on the proper mummy, inside a tomb bearing the young king's name. That might seem enough to settle the matter. Yet the place where an object is discovered is not necessarily where its story began. To determine whether the mask was truly made for Tutankhamun, we must first examine the circumstances that brought it into the tomb. The sudden death of a young king did not always leave the royal court enough time to prepare everything he would need. In Tutankhamun's case, the funeral had to meet a strict religious deadline. That limit would turn the question of the mask's origins into a matter of urgency. The deadline was 70 days. According to the account of royal burial practices followed here, this was the period between the king's death and the moment his body had to be placed inside the tomb. During that time, the body was dried with natron salt, wrapped in linen, subjected to sacred rituals, and prepared for its journey into the afterlife. When the 70 days ended, the burial place had to be sealed. This deadline governed far more than the work of the embalmers. It placed every decision around them under the same pressure. Any unfinished chamber, missing object, or unprepared ritual had to be completed before the appointed moment. There was no room for one delayed task to postpone the entire funeral. Tutankhamun was only about 18 or 19 years old when he died. Every clue presented here points toward a sudden death, not a prolonged illness that might have given the royal court months to prepare. The interval between a living king and a complete royal funeral was therefore exceptionally brief. From the moment the embalmers received his body, every unfinished task was racing against the same clock. Preparing the body alone consumed most of those 70 days. Yet the king could not be laid to rest in an empty chamber. The tomb had to be completed, and everything he would need in the afterlife had to be assembled. Coffins, shrines, statues, thrones, jewelry, and countless ritual objects all had to be ready before the doors were sealed. At the center of this entire process stood the golden mask. According to an estimate attributed to unnamed master goldsmiths, shaping and inlaying a custom mask of this quality could have taken several months under ideal conditions. That estimate is not linked to a specific study, but it raises precisely the question suggested by the state of the tomb. Was the mask truly created from scratch only after Tutankhamun died? The burial complex does not resemble a monument prepared at leisure for a pharaoh. The tomb contains only 4 small chambers. Compared with the vast royal tombs of the Valley of the Kings, it appears unusually cramped and modest for the ruler of the 2 lands. Even the decoration carries signs of haste. Some paintings on the walls of the burial chamber have been described as unfinished, with areas that appear never to have received their final touches. This alone does not prove that the entire funeral was improvised. But when considered alongside the king's youth and the strict burial deadline, it suggests that those responsible were working under severe pressure. The most important evidence, however, is not found on the walls. It lies among the objects packed into the tomb to accompany Tutankhamun into eternity. As the artifacts were catalogued, many appeared not to have been made specifically for the young king. Some did not seem to match him in form or design. Certain pieces of jewelry had dimensions and styles described as feminine. Together, these objects no longer resemble a unified burial collection created from the beginning for one person alone. The most striking details are the cartouches, the oval frames used to enclose royal names. On several objects, the original name is believed to have been erased and replaced with that of Tutankhamun. This is more than an impression based on style or appearance. If that description is correct, then at least some of the burial goods had belonged to someone else before they entered his tomb. This changes how we interpret the urgency surrounding the funeral. A small tomb could have many explanations, and an unfinished painting could be understood in several ways. But a name erased and replaced by another reveals a specific act. An existing object was altered to serve a new burial. There is no need to assume that everything in the tomb came from somewhere else. We need only acknowledge one point. Reuse appears to have played a part in this burial. Those preparing the funeral may have taken objects that were already available, changed their identifying marks, and placed them in Tutankhamun's tomb before the 70 days expired. This is the link that makes the question of the mask far more serious. Without evidence of objects being renamed, the idea that the mask once belonged to someone else might seem like speculation, detached from its historical setting. But when the burial goods themselves show signs of passing from one owner to another, that possibility no longer emerges from nowhere. It arises from a funeral in which reuse appears to have actually occurred. Even so, context cannot replace evidence. The fact that a piece of jewelry or a ritual object was renamed does not prove that the mask underwent the same process. It simply gives us a reason to ask the question in the right place. To go any further, we must stop looking at the chamber, the walls, and the objects surrounding the king. We must examine the golden face itself. If the mask was originally created for someone else, did it preserve any physical trace of its first owner? The first clue may lie in the ears. The earlobes of Tutankhamun's mask contain holes that pass completely through the gold. These are not decorative marks imitating piercings. They are genuine openings from which earrings could once have hung. On an object intended to represent the king for all eternity, this small detail immediately raises a question. Did the person originally envisioned for the mask wear earrings? In the interpretation of ancient Egyptian artistic conventions presented here, earrings were more commonly associated with children and women than with adult male pharaohs. Without specific supporting sources, this should not be treated as an absolute rule. Even so, the ears remain an unusual feature worthy of investigation. The mask was not an ordinary portrait of daily life. It was the official image of the king after death. The second clue lies within the first. The pierced holes appear to have been covered with small gold discs, leaving no obvious openings on the finished face. The word appear is crucial. The added gold may look like a repair, but appearance alone cannot reveal when it was applied or what purpose it served. Even so, the logic behind the theory is easy to understand. A craftsman creating a new mask for Tutankhamun would have no clear reason to pierce 2 holes and then immediately seal them. But if the mask already existed and had once been prepared for someone who wore earrings, covering the old holes would have been a sensible alteration. The observation does not prove that this happened. It simply gives the theory a physical foundation. From the ears, attention turns to the face itself. Over the years, several specialists have described its features as soft and somewhat feminine. The full lips, rounded cheeks, and slender jaw seem less imposing than the commanding image often expected of a male pharaoh. Yet, this remains a visual judgment. The softness could reflect Tutankhamun's youth, an idealized artistic style, or simply the way modern eyes interpret a face created more than 3,000 years ago. Feminine features alone cannot identify the original owner. They are worth noting because they point in the same direction as the questions raised by the ears, but they are not a scientific measurement. If the theory rested only on an impression of the face, it might go no further than artistic interpretation. The third clue seems more closely connected to the materials themselves. Under suitable lighting, the gold of the face has been described as warmer and slightly redder than the gold of the surrounding nemes headdress. The headdress appears to have a cooler and purer golden tone. This visible difference has led to speculation that the two areas may contain different alloys, or may have been made from separate batches of gold. If that speculation is correct, several possibilities emerge. The two sections may have been crafted at different times or during separate stages of production. In the strongest version of the theory, the face and the nemes headdress may not have begun as parts of a single object at all. They may have been joined together later. But there are major gaps in that chain of reasoning. A difference in the color of gold does not automatically prove a difference in origin. Surface conditions, finishing methods, or some unexplained feature of the manufacturing process could also cause the two areas to appear slightly different. Moving directly from a difference in color to the conclusion that two separate objects were joined together requires a far greater leap than the initial observation supports. At this point, the mask presents us with a cluster of clues rather than one decisive piece of evidence. The ears are pierced. The holes appear to have been covered. Some observers interpret the face as feminine. The face and the nemes headdress are said to display different shades of gold. Together, these details suggest that the object may have undergone some form of alteration. Their significance comes from the fact that they all appear on the same object. One unusual feature could be an artistic choice. Two might reflect the techniques used by the craftsman. When several features suggest modification, the possibility of reuse becomes harder to dismiss. Yet a growing number of suspicions does not transform them into proof. Several unconfirmed observations remain exactly that. Each clue also has an alternative explanation. Tutankhamun may have been portrayed as an extremely young man, meaning that the pierced ears and delicate features do not necessarily point toward a woman. The difference in the color of the gold could result from a technical process unrelated to the joining of separate pieces. The areas interpreted as repairs would also require scientific analysis before their true nature could be established. This boundary must remain clear. The pierced ears are a visible physical feature. The idea that they were sealed to conceal an earlier identity is an interpretation. The two shades of gold are a reported observation. The claim that they prove the two sections were created at different times is a hypothesis. The face may appear feminine, but that impression cannot identify a particular person. The mask, then, offers no confession. Instead, it presents a chain of connected questions. When considered alongside renamed burial objects assembled for a hurried funeral, those questions make the possibility of reuse worthy of serious investigation. But to move from the idea that the mask may have been altered to the claim that it was created for a specific person, another link is needed. If Tutankhamun was not the first owner, whose face could this have been within the royal timeline? The theory points toward one name, Nefertiti. To understand why, we must follow the reasoning of the original account to its conclusion. Tutankhamun died suddenly at a young age. His funeral was constrained by a strict deadline. The tomb shows signs of hurried preparation, while some burial objects appear to have been taken from elsewhere and renamed. Under these circumstances, the theory proposes that no completed mask was ready for him when he died. If the estimated production time is accurate, those preparing the funeral could not solve the problem simply by working faster. In this scenario, the most practical option would have been to find a royal mask that was already complete. From this emerges the theory of reuse. A mask created for another member of the royal family was brought forward. The pierced ears were covered, part of the face may have been altered, the former name was erased, and the name of Tutankhamun was placed over it, just as other burial objects are believed to have passed from one owner to another. It is a coherent scenario, but it remains only a scenario. The features of the mask make it seem plausible. while the context of the tomb prevents it from being dismissed as pure invention. Yet none of these clues identifies the previous owner. To move from the possibility of a reused mask to Nefertiti, the theory must turn to the royal timeline. Nefertiti was the chief queen of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who attempted to transform the religious foundations of Egypt by placing the solar disk Aten at the center of worship. The account also identifies her as Tutankhamun's stepmother. This placed Nefertiti close to the young king and high enough within the royal family for her burial objects, if they existed, to have matched the quality expected for a pharaoh. After Akhenaten died, the records describe the appearance of a ruler who bore the royal name Nefer-Neferuaten. Some scholars mentioned in the account, though not identified by name, believe this ruler may have been Nefertiti herself. According to this theory, she ascended the throne and assumed all the symbols of kingship. If that identification is correct, she was not merely a queen. She may have held the status required for a royal burial and a funerary mask of her own. But this step in the argument contains an important condition. The identity of Nefer-Neferuaten remains disputed. The claim that Nefertiti ruled as a pharaoh is not presented as settled fact. Any suggestion that the mask was prepared for her therefore rests upon an identification that is itself uncertain. Nefertiti then disappears from the historical record in a way that makes the mystery even more compelling. No tomb has been conclusively identified as hers, and no mummy has been confirmed as her remains. A woman who once stood at the center of the Amarna court left behind an absence precisely where we might expect to find a royal burial. When the two timelines are placed side by side, the pieces appear to fit. One woman may have held the status of a pharaoh and may have possessed royal burial equipment. A young king died, while preparations for his funeral seem to have been incomplete. At the same time, both the tomb and the mask display features that have been interpreted as evidence of reuse. This is why Nefertiti became the leading candidate within the theory. The ears cannot speak her name, and a different shade of gold cannot identify a particular individual. Her name enters the story because her status, her relationship to Tutankhamun, and the missing evidence of her burial create an explanation that seems to fit the available clues. But a good fit is not proof. A timeline may explain the clues without representing what actually happened. The absence of Nefertiti's tomb does not prove that her burial equipment was taken. The presence of reused objects in Tutankhamun's tomb does not prove that the mask was among them. Even if the mask was altered, that fact alone would not reveal the identity of its first owner. For the theory to cross that boundary, it would need evidence that could not merely be seen on the surface, but measured within the metal itself. The question was no longer whether Nefertiti fit the story. The question was what scientific examination of the mask had actually revealed. In 2014, the mask was damaged during cleaning at the Cairo Museum. The braided beard attached beneath the chin broke away, forcing the artifact to undergo conservation work. The accident was not directly connected to the question of the original owner, but it created an opportunity for the mask to be examined more closely. The account names the German conservator Christian Eckermann as one of the specialists involved in treating the artifact. While working on the mask, he is said to have conducted X-ray fluorescent scanning, commonly known as XRF. Unlike visual judgments about the shades of gold, this examination was presented as a scientific measurement of the material composition. The reported results challenged the reuse theory. The gold of the face was said to match the gold of the nemes headdress. If the composition of the two areas is indeed similar, then the visible difference in color is no longer strong evidence that they came from separate batches of gold. The cartouche also showed no sign that an earlier name had been erased and replaced. This presents an even more direct challenge. The theory that the mask once belonged to someone else requires a change of identity. Yet, according to the reported scan, no trace of such an alteration was found beneath the place bearing Tutankhamun's name. These two findings do not explain every unusual feature of the mask. They do not make the pierced ears disappear, nor do they reveal why the holes appear to have been covered. But they weaken two crucial links in the proposed scenario. One is the possibility that the face and the nemes headdress were made from different sources of gold. The other is the possibility that an earlier royal name was erased beneath the present cartouche. If the investigation ended here, the most cautious interpretation would be clear. The mask contains several unusual features, but the material analysis identified in the account did not confirm that two different sources of gold had been joined together, or that one royal name had been replaced by another. The Nefertiti theory may survive as a question, but no decisive trace has yet been found within the metal. An unidentified group of skeptics has challenged that conclusion. Their argument is that XRF detects only the elements present near the surface. If ancient craftsmen used gold from the same batch to alter the mask, a similarity in composition would not reveal which section had been created first, and which had been added later. According to this argument, any seams may also have been hammered until they became extremely thin. If an alteration left only a slight disturbance in the structure of the metal, a test focused on chemical composition might pass over it without detecting the history of the craftsmanship. This is a possibility proposed by skeptics, not a conclusion demonstrated by any identified source in the transcript. That objection changes the technical question. Instead of asking which elements the gold contains, we must ask what happened to it. Metal that was hammered, scraped smooth, and shaped again might preserve a different pattern of disturbance from metal that was never altered. If a method existed that could read this history as described, it might examine precisely what XRF was said to have missed. At this point, the story presents its strongest claim, but also the claim with the greatest gap in sourcing. According to the account, a materials physicist identified only as Dr. Voss applied a technique called quantum resonance imaging to a set of high-resolution data from the mask in 2024. No full name, research institution, published paper, participating team, or direct link is provided. Dr. Voss is the only identifying information given in the transcript. The technique is described as reading the disturbances left by physical work rather than the chemical composition of the gold. The data supposedly confirmed that the face and the nemes headdress matched, consistent with the earlier result. The scan then focused on the gold directly beneath the cartouche bearing the name of Tutankhamun. There, the story claims that the atomic surface was uneven. It was described as showing patterns of displacement, consistent with metal that had been hammered, scraped smooth, and worked again. If true, this would be exactly the kind of trace predicted by the argument about the limits of XRF. The composition of the gold could remain the same even if one area had experienced a different mechanical history. The claim goes further still. The software is said to have used the disturbed atoms to reconstruct an earlier layer of writing, one symbol at a time. According to the story, the name that finally appeared on the screen was Nefertiti, the royal name previously associated with Nefertiti by the theory. If this result could be verified, it would connect almost every link in the chain of reasoning. Some burial objects had been renamed. The mask displayed features suspected of being alterations. The royal timeline placed Nefertiti in the position of a possible original owner, and now, beneath the name of Tutankhamun, there appeared to be a royal name linked to her. But precisely because this result fits the theory so perfectly, the standard of verification must be higher, not lower. A name said to have appeared on a screen does not automatically become archaeological evidence. Before it can determine whose face the mask represents, we must know where the scan came from, how it was conducted, and whether its findings can be independently tested. The problem is that the reported discoveries from the 2024 scan have not been formally published. There is no research paper, responsible institution, or technical record identifying Dr. Voss, explaining the origin of the data, or showing how the reconstructed name was tested. This gap does not prove that the claim is false, but it prevents the claim from being treated as a confirmed result. A scan cannot be evaluated simply because its conclusion matches the theory it is supposed to prove. It must have an identifiable source, a transparent method, and results that can be independently examined. What remains are two very different levels of evidence. The first consists of features that can be observed or directly described. Some burial objects show signs of renamed ownership, the ears of the mask are pierced, and those holes appear to have been covered. These details make reuse more plausible, but they do not identify an earlier owner. The second level is the claim that the name Nefertiti was recovered from the atomic structure of the gold. This is the detail that transforms a general possibility into a story about Nefertiti. Yet it is also the detail that lacks an identifiable source and has not been formally published. The XRF results attributed to Christian Ekman point in the opposite direction. The gold of the face was said to match that of the nemes headdress, while the cartouche showed no evidence of an earlier inscription beneath it. That examination may not resolve every question, but an unverified objection cannot simply erase the reported evidence that challenges the theory. The mask does contain unusual features that make the possibility of alteration for Tutankhamun worthy of consideration. The presence of reused burial objects in the tomb means the idea is not without foundation. Nefertiti also fits the royal timeline as a possible candidate. But a plausible fit and a confirmed conclusion are not the same thing. If the reported 2024 scan is removed as decisive evidence, nothing else directly identifies Nefertiti. The pierced ears, apparent repairs, and objects that once belonged to other people cannot name her. The most troubling possibility is not that the mask definitely bears the face of a queen. It is that an unsourced claim may lead the public to believe the mystery has already been solved, when the available evidence allows only one responsible conclusion. The question remains open. The mask may have been reused, but the evidence presented in this account does not prove that it originally belonged to Nefertiti. The name Neferneferuaden can change that conclusion only if the scan is published and independently verified.